Dorian Elessar Vex was found sleeping beneath a rusted overpass when they arrested him. Blood on his hands, a dog tag around his neck, and a dead billionaire 3 floors up. Kima Solas, a young attorney with more courage than reputation, took one look at his name and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What began as an open and shut case against a homeless veteran unraveled into a chilling conspiracy no one was meant to survive. By the time the judge heard his name aloud, the entire courtroom rose, not in protest, but in reverence. This is the story of how a forgotten soldier became the most dangerous witness in America. Dorian Vex was a ghost long before anyone knew his name. He lived beneath the rusted spine of an old overpass in South Baltimore, a forgotten stretch of concrete surrounded by broken bottles, damp cardboard, and the low hum of passing traffic that never stopped for anyone like him. His spot, a hollowed-out nook behind a cluster of steel beams, was known to only a few. He kept to himself, never begged, and rarely spoke. His only companions were a battered duffel bag, an old military jacket 2 sizes too large, and a silence that made others uncomfortable. To most, he was just another homeless man, just another shadow moving through alleys with no past, no future, and no reason to be remembered. He didn't go to shelters. He didn't ask for help. When city workers came to clear the underpass, he vanished before they could say a word. He always came back, as if tethered to that piece of land by something deeper than comfort. People speculated. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was dangerous. No one asked his name. Dorian had once worn that same jacket under a different sky. Years ago, in a life now blurred and broken, he had served in the military. Not the kind of service that ends in medals and flag-draped funerals. His work had been silent, shadowy, and unseen. He had been part of something no one talked about. A black ops unit so secret that even other branches of the military didn't speak its name. Operation Solstice, they had called it, a mission deep overseas that was supposed to last 2 weeks. Dorian returned alone after 6 months. Whatever had happened out there had shattered him. His team had vanished. His official discharge papers were filled with blacked-out lines. He had no family, no record beyond a few vague commendations, and the Army seemed content to erase him. He was given a thin pension and instructions to transition quietly. He never did. Instead, he walked away from everything: benefits, housing, therapy. He disappeared into the city, where no one cared who he was or what he'd done. It wasn't until the morning of September 9th that anyone in the city even remembered his name. That morning, Calder Price, a wealthy philanthropist and real estate developer, was found dead in his penthouse apartment in one of Baltimore's most secure high-rise buildings. The news exploded across local media. Price wasn't just rich, he was connected. He'd donated millions to veterans' causes, hosted political fundraisers, and rubbed elbows with senators and generals. His death was brutal. Multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle, and a single item left behind: a tarnished dog tag, stained with blood. The tag bore the name D. Vex. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, when the officers read him his rights, he didn't even blink. A knife matching the one used in the killing was found in a storm drain nearby. His fingerprints matched those on the blade. Blood on his jacket matched Calder Price's. It seemed like an open and shut case. But some things didn't make sense. Dorian had no known relationship with Price, no motive, no history of violence, and most puzzling of all, no record of ever entering the building. There was no footage of him in the lobby, no prints on the elevator, no broken windows or signs of forced entry. Still, the evidence was heavy. The media labeled him a killer within hours. "From soldier to savage," one paper wrote. "Homeless murderer strikes high society," said another. None of them asked why a man like Calder Price would end up in a room with someone like Dorian Vex. The public reacted with outrage, and when the authorities patted themselves on the back, one question remained unanswered. How had Dorian Vex, a man invisible to the world, suddenly become the center of its attention? And why? Despite all the evidence, did something about the case feel unfinished? What no one knew was that this was only the beginning. The case against Dorian Vex moved quickly. Public outrage demanded swift justice, and the police, confident in the mountain of physical evidence, pushed for an expedited trial. A court-appointed attorney was assigned to defend him, but after a single meeting she withdrew, citing a conflict of interest. That was when Kima Solas stepped in. Kima was young, ambitious, and relatively unknown in legal circles. She had taken on a handful of pro bono cases and built a quiet reputation for caring about her clients more than her paychecks. When she first reviewed Dorian's file, it looked simple, almost too simple. The evidence painted a picture of a desperate man snapping after years on the streets. Motive wasn't necessary. The world assumed he had nothing left to lose, but something about the case gnawed at Kima. She visited Dorian in holding. He said nothing during their first meeting, just stared through her as if watching something far away. Still, she pressed on. She combed through every document, every photo, every frame of surveillance footage. The deeper she looked, the more uneasy she became. The timeline was neat, too neat. A homeless man somehow slipped past 3 layers of high-rise security, murdered a wealthy philanthropist with military precision, and left behind his own dog tag? It felt wrong. It felt arranged. While reading through Dorian's service file, something caught her eye. He had been awarded several medals for bravery, including the Silver Star. But one decoration stood out, a commendation labeled Black Sigil. There was no public record of such an award. When she searched military databases, she found nothing. No explanation, no references, just a quiet dead end. She reached out to a retired Army intelligence officer she had represented in a civil case months earlier. He owed her a favor. After a tense conversation over encrypted email, he sent her a scanned document, badly blurred, heavily redacted. In the margins, a handwritten note read, "Operation Solstice, burned record." What little text remained mentioned deep asset engagement, unit fragmentation, and, a chilling phrase, containment priority, DVEX. Kima felt the floor shift beneath her. If this document was real, it meant the military had once classified Dorian as a liability. Not a hero, not even a survivor, something to be managed. Her pulse quickened. She requested additional records from the Department of Defense, but was quickly denied. 2 days later, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her laptop had been tampered with, and her notes were gone. She kept going. Calder Price had always been a public figure, known for his charity work. But a search through old federal contract logs showed that in 2008 he sat on a secret oversight board tasked with approving black budget operations in the Middle East. One of those operations matched the timeline of Dorian's deployment. Price had reviewed the funding for Operation Solstice. This was the first time Price and Dorian's names appeared in the same. Universef further digging revealed another oddity. 6 months before Price's death, he had liquidated several international assets and moved large sums into offshore accounts. A week before he died, he attempted to contact a private intelligence firm based in Zurich. No one knew why. The call was never returned. And then there was the footage. The building where Price lived had state-of-the-art security, including full elevator logs, biometric access control, and 24-hour surveillance. According to the system, no one unauthorized had entered his floor the night of the murder. But Kima, with help from a friendly tech contractor, reviewed raw backup files. Buried in hours of low-resolution video, she found something strange. At 1:42 a.m., 3 hours before the murder, a tall man entered through the underground parking garage. He wore a dark jacket and hat and walked with a slight limp. He moved confidently with practiced ease. The cameras failed to catch a clear face, but when the contractor ran facial recognition against old military databases, a match popped up. Mailer Kern, a name long forgotten, but not to the right people. A man last seen in Kabul in 2015, listed missing and presumed dead. A former intelligence operative turned ghost Kima realized with growing horror that Dorian Vex might not be a murderer. He might be a witness. One someone had gone to great lengths to silence. The days leading up to the trial were marked by growing unease. Kima Solas, now fully immersed in Dorian Vex's case, found herself tangled in a web of secrets that reached far beyond the courtroom. She knew she was no longer handling a simple murder trial. This was something darker, layered in cover-ups, deception, and decades-old grudges. But each piece of evidence brought her closer to the truth and to danger. After identifying Maylor Kern from the footage, Kima tried to track down more on him. The name had been buried deep in black-budget projects and off-the-record files. Kern was a specialist in psychological warfare and black site interrogations. He had worked for several intelligence contractors before disappearing after a controversial operation in Kabul. Officially, he was presumed dead. Unofficially, he had simply vanished. His presence in the security footage raised an urgent question. If Kern was alive and present at Price's apartment the night of the murder, then who was really behind it, and why? Kima made another bold move. Using a contact from a tech security firm, she managed to gain limited access to a restricted archive, an encrypted server known among insiders as the Well. There she found fragments of an internal Pentagon report, one never meant to be seen by civilian eyes. The report was titled Asset 437, Status Terminated Pending Containment. The name attached to that asset was Dorian Vex. Her hands shook as she scrolled through. There were references to Operation Solstice and a field team called Shade Unit 9. The mission details were mostly redacted, but one thing was clear. The operation had been botched. The entire unit wiped out in a betrayal during an unauthorized engagement in the Kandahar region. Only Dorian survived. According to the documents, his testimony would have exposed the illegal execution of civilians and unreported financial deals involving high-level American contractors, one of whom was Calder Price. The truth hit hard. Price had been part of the reason Dorian's unit had died, and somehow, after all these years, someone had brought the last survivor and one of the orchestrators together in the same city. That couldn't be coincidence. Someone had set this in motion, and now they wanted to close the loop permanently. Kima turned her attention back to the murder weapon. The knife had been found in a storm drain near Dorian's camp. The blade bore military engravings, but curiously, the style of the knife was a variant not issued to American forces. It was a foreign model, custom-built, used by private contractors and special operators in shadow roles. She submitted the blade for forensic analysis and found traces of a chemical compound often used to sterilize weapons for forensic evasion. This wasn't the tool of a man living under a bridge. It was the tool of a professional means. Dorian remained mostly silent. He answered few questions, offering only fragments of his past. He didn't deny being in Price's building, nor did he confirm it. The only thing he gave her was a name, Aaron Keel. Kima didn't recognize it at first, but after days of searching, she found a file on a closed intelligence project. Aaron Keel wasn't a person. It was a directive, a covert agreement allowing former agents to operate domestically under the radar in the interest of national security. Kern's name was listed as one of the authorized operatives. That meant the government had given Kern free rein. He could move across the country, conduct black operations, and eliminate threats, all without oversight. If he had decided that Price had become a liability, it explained the killing. But planting the murder on Dorian? That was personal. The case took another sharp turn when a private courier delivered a sealed envelope to Kima's office. Inside were 3 grainy photographs, one of Price meeting with Kern, another of Dorian's old unit in the field, and the last, a shocking image of Kern standing over a body that appeared to be a fellow Shade Unit operative. There was no note, only a single phrase written in red ink: "Solstice never ended." Kima stared at the photos long into the night. Dorian wasn't a broken man who had lost everything. He was a piece left on the board, one final thread in a game that had never really stopped. The trial wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about survival. And Kima knew that once she stepped into that courtroom, there would be no turning back. The trial of Dorian Vex began under a heavy cloud of public scrutiny. News cameras lined the courthouse steps. Commentators speculated endlessly, painting him as either a tragic figure or a ruthless killer? Inside the courtroom, however, a different story was unfolding. One not yet visible to the public. Kima Solas walked in with quiet resolve, carrying with her more than just legal argument. She carried secrets that, if spoken aloud, could shift the foundation of everything the court believed it knew about this case. The prosecution wasted no time. Their narrative was polished and confident. Dorian Vex was unstable, they said, a man ravaged by war and driven by rage. They showed graphic photos of Calder Price's body, emphasizing the brutality of the attack, the bloodied knife, the dog tag, the fingerprints. It was a clean presentation, tailored to stir emotion rather than raise questions. The jury listened intently. The judge, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, gave no visible reaction. Kima's turn began with hesitation in the room. She was young, and the weight of the case seemed too much for one attorney to carry alone, but she started carefully, threading each sentence with precision. She acknowledged the tragedy of Price's death, then slowly began to unravel the serial story, piece by piece. She asked the court to consider not just what was found at the crime scene, but how it got there. She brought up the unusual nature of the knife, the lack of forced entry, and the odd absence of Dorian on the building's surveillance logs. She introduced the possibility of another man, one who had slipped in quietly and left behind a perfectly constructed frame. The judge allowed her to present limited information about Maylor Kern. Though much of what Kima had uncovered was classified or unverified, she managed to confirm Kern's existence and his connection to Calder Price through archived federal contract approvals. The jury listened with widening eyes as she explained the strange gap in the security system that night and the mysterious figure caught briefly on garage footage, unidentified but eerily similar in build and gait to Kern. Then came the documents with great care. Kima presented heavily redacted military records to the court, pages covered in black lines, signatures blurred out, words scratched away. But even what remained was enough to make an impact. There had been an operation, there had been a betrayal, and there had been one survivor. Dorian Vex didn't frame him as a hero or a victim. She presented him as a man carrying the burden of something no one should ever have to carry, and she left the courtroom with a question that hung in the air like smoke. If someone had wanted to silence Dorian Vex forever, what better way than to frame him for a murder he didn't commit? The courtroom buzzed with uncertainty. The prosecution tried to recover, attacking her evidence as speculative. They called it conspiracy theory. They said it was all distraction. But then Kima made her final move. She called to the stand a former government analyst turned whistleblower who testified, under subpoena and federal protection, that a quiet internal inquiry had once been opened into Operation Solstice and its aftermath. The inquiry had ended abruptly, and everyone involved had been told to forget it ever existed. As the testimony ended, silence fell over the room. The judge asked for the defendant's full name to be entered into the record before recess. "Dorian Elessar Vex," the clerk said aloud. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, an elderly man in uniform stood up. A second followed. Then a woman with medals on her coat. One by one more people rose, not out of protest, not out of outrage, but in silent recognition. Veterans, officers, men and women who had known names like his, who had seen comrades erased from history, who understood what silence often cost. The judge looked out over the courtroom, visibly shaken. No one spoke. No one had to. In that moment, it was clear this trial wasn't just about murder. It was about memory, about justice, not only in law, but in truth. And truth was rising to its feet, finally seen after years in the shadows. The final day of Dorian Vex's trial arrived like a storm hanging low in the sky, heavy, gray, and filled with unspoken tension. The courtroom, packed wall to wall, felt more like a battlefield than a hall of justice. Outside, crowds gathered with signs, some demanding justice for Calder Price, others holding up faded photos of lost soldiers, now claiming Dorian as one of their own. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Whatever happened today, it would leave a mark. Kima Solas rose for her closing argument, aware that she was walking a razor's edge. She could not deny the blood or the fingerprints. She could not erase the image the prosecution had so carefully painted. But she could tell the truth, or at least as much of it as she had managed to uncover. She spoke not as a lawyer, but as a witness to a buried history. She reminded the jury of the facts that had never added up. No trace of forced entry into one of the city's most secure buildings, a foreign combat knife left at the scene, the dog tag too conveniently placed, and a security system with unexplained gaps. She walked them through Dorian's past, not with pity, but with clarity. A man who had been part of a mission that officially didn't exist, whose unit had died in silence, whose name had been placed on a classified list not for commendation but for containment. She explained that Dorian hadn't sought revenge, he hadn't sought justice, he had simply wanted to disappear, and that someone had gone to great lengths to ensure he never had a chance to speak. Then came the final piece. Late the night before, Kima had received a package from an anonymous sender. It contained a flash drive with a single file, audio recorded from a phone call between Calder Price and an unknown voice, later verified through spectral analysis to be Malor. The conversation was brief, but damning. Price sounded frantic, desperate. He spoke of the survivor, of someone coming back to haunt us. Kern, calm and cold, replied, "There are ways to tie up loose ends. You'll be taken care of, one way or another." Kima played the audio in court. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the prosecution sat frozen, their case slowly cracking like ice underfoot. The judge recessed for deliberation. The jury took the evidence into a chamber heavy with consequence. Hours passed. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreman stood. He looked directly at Dorian before speaking. "On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Dorian Elessar Vex, not guilty." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Dorian did not react. He sat motionless, his eyes unreadable. Kima, exhausted, closed her eyes as if finally allowed to breathe. But the story didn't end there. Moments after the verdict, as the judge was preparing to close the session, a man in a gray suit entered the courtroom. He handed the judge a sealed folder. The judge scanned its contents, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. He called Kima and the prosecution to the bench. After a short, hushed exchange, the judge returned to his seat and addressed the courtroom. "This court has received urgent federal communication regarding the defendant. In light of new material, Mr. Vex is to be released immediately, with no further proceedings under this jurisdiction." No explanation followed. No further words. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Veterans saluted. Others stood in stunned silence. Reporters rushed to capture every moment, every expression. But Dorian, flanked by Kima and a plain-suited federal official, slipped into an unmarked black car and disappeared down the street, leaving no comment, no farewell. He was gone. Again, in the weeks that followed, whispers spread. The case became legend. Some said Dorian Vex had entered witness protection. Others believed he had been taken back into the system that once tried to erase him. One journalist claimed he had seen Dorian in a border town, helping displaced veterans. Another swore he had died years earlier, and this had all been a ghost story made real. Kima never spoke of him again. But in quiet corners of the country, among those who had served and those who had suffered, the name Dorian Vex became something more than a man. It became a warning. It became a myth. It became truth that could not be buried.